Hello and welcome to this video, and this video is going to be called Return to Forever, The Legacy, Part 1. Right, why Part 1? Well, I'm going to take some time really looking at Return to Forever. I think if we were to look at the history of jazz fusion, there's three bands that seem to be the holy trinity of jazz fusion, and that would be the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Weather Report and Return to Forever, and I have not dealt with Return to Forever enough on this channel, so I thought I was going to rectify that on these videos. One of the reasons I haven't dealt with Return to Forever, because I think a simple ranking doesn't do them justice, and the reason for that is because the solo albums that come out at the same time as the Return to Forever albums are coming out are as important to the history of jazz fusion as the actual Return to Forever albums themselves. So I want to really not only explore the Return to Forever albums, but also explore those solo albums that came out at the same time. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Latin jazz fusion Return to Forever that presages the I use the word presages then, is that the right word? That goes before the classic jazz rock of the classic Return to Forever. I will talk a little bit about the two albums that come out after that period, but not so much. I really want to concentrate on the jazz rock incarnation of Return to Forever and really get into that. Right, so let's back up and see how this all comes about and how it fits into the story of jazz fusion, which I think is very important. Weather Report, Mahavishnu Orchestra and Return to Forever are very important in this history simply because they sold a lot of records. All three bands really sold a large number of albums, and that's what makes them important. The fact that those albums sold meant the record companies started to look at jazz fusion as a commercial commodity, and it means they started to pump money into it and market them in much the same ways that you would market rock bands, especially the prog rock bands that were coming out at the same time. I think that's something that never gets mentioned. And with the solo albums that came out from the Return to Forever members, they also sold very well and were very influential. The three bands I just mentioned, the members of those bands had all played with Miles Davis. They are all on Bitches Brew. So you can scoot back and look at my videos on Bitches Brew to talk about that legacy. Chick Corea, he's in a strange position in the Miles Davis group, because whilst Miles is making all these groundbreaking albums with John McLaughlin and Joe Zawinul and Wayne Shorter, at that time he's got a different band, and that band's got Jack DeJohnette in it, it's got Airtu in it, Dave Liebman and Chick Corea, and they are pursuing a much more free, esoteric type of jazz fusion. Chick Corea in the late 60s is really making some avant-garde music. He's got a band called Circle with Anthony Braxton. This is very difficult music, it's not commercial at all. Unlike John McLaughlin, that leaves the Miles Davis recording group, sets up Tony Williams' Lifetime, which has all the elements of fusion in it but just isn't a success. He then in 1971 goes on to form the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and this is a huge success. Whilst this is going on, Chick Corea is making very esoteric music. Now, these guys must have looked at John McLaughlin and go, God, he's suddenly selling a lot of records. Maybe I should change my tack. Same thing happens with Weather Report. Weather Report's first few albums are very esoteric, very improvisatory albums. They still haven't found that sound that's going to make them very successful. So Chick Corea, I think, decides to try and do something more commercial, just more accessible. That's a better name for it. And he films a band called The Return to Forever, and this is a Latin jazz band with Spanish overtones. And they make two albums. They make the first album on ECM Records called Return to Forever, and then they make a follow-up album Light as a Feather. They got Flora Purim on vocals. They have songs on there. This is a real attempt, I think, to make Chick Corea's music more accessible, but also, I think, to explore the X factor that makes Chick so important, which is those Latin American and Spanish influences. So if we look at Weather Report, we can see that the X factor for them is Joe Zawinul's sort of Eastern European folk music shot through African music approach, which I think makes them so special. With the Mavish Orchestra, of course, it's John McGaughlin's interest in Indian music. So in 1973, when Chick Corea is looking at the Mavish Orchestra and going, oh my God, this has changed what's going on in jazz. I want to do something like that. I want to turn up the volume. I want to bring the electric guitars in. That influence of the Mavish Orchestra is very important, but the difference is that we've got Chick Corea's Latin American and Spanish influences in there. And they make this album, which is the first jazz rock Return to Forever album. Which is in terms of jazz fusion history, is monumental. This album's monumental. Now, the lineup on this is not nailed. Okay? So on here, we've got Chick Corea, obviously he's now playing electric piano, acoustic piano, organ, harps, organ, gongs, and notice there's no synths on here yet. And we've got Stanley Clarke from the previous incarnation, Return to Forever, on electric bass and fuzz bass. He's no longer playing double bass. That's a change. Stanley's moved to electric bass. I think Stanley Clarke does not get the props for being one of the greatest acoustic bass players in jazz at the time, that then makes a move to electric bass and then rewrites the book of electric bass. This is quite incredible. We've got Lenny White on drums. Now, Lenny White was not the original drummer on this album. The original drummer was Steve Gadd. Now, Steve Gadd, of course, is another monumental drummer in the history of jazz fusion. And Steve Gadd doesn't want to tour. But we know Steve Gadd's going to make his mark. It's interesting to ponder whether the way Return to Forever would have gone if Steve Gadd had stayed. Because, of course, Steve Gadd was bringing so much to jazz fusion drumming at that time. But, of course, so is Lenny White. Lenny White's there at the same time as Billy Cobham, doing something very similar. I think this is another thing that doesn't get mentioned, as though Lenny White came in a little bit after Billy Cobham, sort of copying him. I've read so many interviews with him. I know this is not the case. You know, Lenny White is on that Bitches Brew album. Lenny White is exploring these ideas at the same time as Cobham. So they record the album. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention that it's got the incredible Bill Connors on guitar. Not Al Di Meola, but Bill Connors. Bill Connors is an incredible guitar player that has had a really interesting journey through music. You know, so he comes out as a sort of screaming John McGoughlin-esque guitarist with his own thing going on. Really incredible playing. He's a lot more out of control in his playing than Al Di Meola. It's a lot more Hendrixy, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. And he really adds something to this album that makes this album unlike all the other Return to Forever albums. After that, he sort of retrains as a sort of classical guitarist and releases some albums on ECM, which are really, really interesting, but he sort of goes along another avenue. And then in the 80s, he then turns up, you know, sounding pretty much like Alan Holdsworth. It's really interesting. He's a really interesting musician that should have really been a superstar. But he jumped ship after this album as well. When Steve Gadd turns around and says that he doesn't want to tour, and I suppose he wants to do a lot more session work, Lenny White has to come in and overdub the drums over the album. I think that's what happened. I'm pretty sure they didn't go in and record it all again, and I'm sure there'll be people who might correct me on this, but I'm pretty sure that what he did was overdub the drums over the album. If he did, it's an incredible achievement, especially back then when, you know, there's no click tracks and, you know, Pro Tools to get everything in time. He would have just been playing with the headphones by ear. This album is really important because it's one of the great jazz rock albums. Now on here, I differentiate between fusion and jazz rock. Jazz rock is a very particular thing where we're really fusing rock music and jazz. You know, heavy rock music and jazz, you know. So there's elements of Hendrix and Zeppelin in there, you know, distorted guitars. And that period where that's successful doesn't last that long a time. Because, of course, the third Miles Davis alumni that's going to come along and change fusion and sell a lot of records is Herbie Hancock, and in '74 he releases Headhunters, and it all gets very funky, which is fantastic because I love the funk. But here we have very little funk. It's all rock, and this is also influenced by prog. You know, Stanley Clarke has many times mentioned the influence of Chris Squire on his bass playing. So I think what's happening is these guys are looking at the prog rock bands. The prog rock bands are really, you know, selling millions of albums, and these people that have had some sort of classical training and really know music inside out thought, well, we can do that. I can write that, and I have that classical influence and arrangement thing in my palette, and I think Chick Corea brings it to the fore. Sorry. This album absolutely burns. Every track is a you know, fusion masterpiece. We get, like, After the Cosmic Rain, which is 8 minutes long. We have Captain Sydney Mouse, which is nearly 9 minutes long. We have Space Circus, which is 6 minutes long. Theme to the Mothership, 8 minutes. So we've got long tracks, and they really solo and they really burn. This is an essential purchase if you're into fusion. You have to hear this album. There's a strong argument that this could well be the greatest of the Return to Forever albums. I think it sometimes gets mentioned like that. I remember when I was a kid and I had my Rolling Stone book of rock and roll, and I would look the details up of these albums before I bought them. The critics sort of rated this one the highest. I don't think that's the case, but I think the reason why it gets that is just because of this sort of energy and innovation on this. This is one of the first, 1973, one of the first great jazz rock albums after the Mahavishnu Orchestra. They've really taken that Mahavishnu Orchestra influence, but it's Chick's Spanish and Latin American influences shot through rock music that make this so special. Also Chick's brilliant arrangement. I would argue that Return to Forever are different to the Mahavishnu Orchestra in that Chick Corea puts more arrangement in there. Stanley Clarke is a virtuoso bass player who is able to bring the bass in as a sort of melody instrument. So you get this sort of classic guitar, keyboards and bass holding the melodies down, and that really gives Return to Forever a signature sound. So here we have it. So that album comes out, and this does well. You know, Chick Corea is now no longer an esoteric artist making, you know, either free jazz or sort of unpigeonholable Latin jazz fusion. He's joined the jazz rock race with this album. I haven't pulled all the albums out. I only pulled the vinyl. I didn't pull the CDs out. And the next album I have on CD, which is Where Have I Known You Before, which again is another fantastic album, really incredible album. And on that album, the synths arrive, which changes the sound yet again, and Al Di Meola arrives. Now Al Di Meola at this point is a very young musician. He's come out of Berkeley, I think. He's been picked up at 19 years old. And Al Di Meola's got a whole bunch of skills which I think no one at that time had on guitar. He's really assimilated McLaughlin's sort of super fast picking, but he's also got like the rock chops, he's got the jazz chops, he's got the classical chops. He's really able to take guitar playing, I think, and bump it up to another level. He's such an important guitarist in the history of guitar. Even though he gets a lot of credit, I still don't think he really gets enough credit as being the father of all. How do I explain this? If you listen to a rock guitarist before Al Di Meola, you've got Jimmy Page and you've got Richie Blackmore, and they're sort of blues based. They've come out of the UK blues boom. After Al Di Meola, you then get Schenker and you get, you know, Eddie Van Halen, and then you get like Randy Rhoads, and then you get Yngwie Malmsteen, and all those I think have a great dollop of Al Di Meola in them. I'm sure he really changes heavy metal for good, especially the guitar playing part of it. Where Have I Known You Before is a lot more arranged. It's a lot more expansive, you know. It's got these beautiful little leitmotifs that appear on the album, where Chick Corea is just playing solo piano, which really points to the stuff he's doing at the same time on ECM Records. And it's also got a lot more sort of exploratory synth work. I think Where Have I Known You Before is equal to the first album. These are two fantastic albums. They follow that up with, excuse me, No Mystery. Now, No Mystery, you can hear that Chick's had a look around again and he's seen what Herbie Hancock's doing. Because I think this is 1975 when that album's made. Headhunters has come out and we get the funk, right? This is, and the Mavish Orchestra go this way as well. You could hear the funk arrive on Visions of the Emerald Beyond. But suddenly you've got this jazz rock, funky sound going on. And I think Return to Forever also play a major part in establishing the funk as being a major component of jazz fusion from then on. The title track, No Mystery, is actually all acoustic. So suddenly Stanley's back on double bass, we've got electric piano, acoustic guitar. And that side of Return to Forever doesn't get mentioned enough, you know. That and the track on No Mystery, now I've forgotten the title of it, I'll have to just grab it here. The track, it's Romantic Warrior, isn't it? The title track again is another fantastic acoustic piece. This, of course, is a little nod again to the Mavish Orchestra that used to do the same thing on their albums. You would get an all acoustic piece, but it really allows Chick Corea to really show the other side of what he does. In 1976, we get the last album. There's only 4 albums. We get the last album by Return to Forever. And this is their masterpiece. Now, I think one of the reasons why this is so important, this is like one of the most important fusion albums ever made. If you don't own it, you're going to have to listen to it. I also think it's one of the greatest prog rock albums that ever made. The prog rock really comes to the fore here. And they've also switched to, I'm pretty sure it's CBS Records yet. So before that, they're on Polydor. And I think that affects the production values, whereas Weather Report and Mavish Orchestra on CBS, and CBS are really pumping in money into this genre. As soon as they turn up here, the production values are just go up a notch, and it just sounds absolutely stunning. Who's the engineer on this? It's produced by Chick Corea, because I would imagine it could well, but it doesn't say on here at all. I'm wondering whether it's Ken Scott. Someone will tell me in the comments, but whoever it is, the production values are higher. This is a very, very important album. As this is going on, the guys in the band are making solo albums, and these solo albums are very, very influential as well. And I think in Al Di Meola and Stanley Clarke's case, they change the face of the instrument they're playing. So on the next video, I really want to get into those solo albums and discuss those and how that relates to the whole legacy of Return to Forever. So that's my part 1, where we've just had a little journey through those first 4 albums. If you wait around, there'll be another one coming soon, and maybe another one after that, because I'm really going to go into depth with Return to Forever. Where I'm going to have a look at the solo albums and the whole legacy, and really just discuss how important this band was and the influence it had on jazz fusion. Anyway, that's the end of this video, end of part 1. I'll see you on part 2. Thank you very much.